I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get Diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Diversifused podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifuse Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. In today's episode, we will discuss navigating change gracefully, transforming workplace culture, with our guest speaker, Tatyana Sanikovich. Tatyana is an HR advisor, a leadership coach, and a facilitator. She combines insights generated from her 15-year career in human resources and culture development and 12 years as HR director at Esalen Institute with her own extensive research and study in transformational practices in human potential. Tatyana works closely with both teams and individuals to drive positive change and achieve lasting success. So welcome, Tatyana, to the Get Diversifused podcast. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you became or decided to become, and your journey to becoming an HR advisor and a leadership coach?
Absolutely. So originally I'm from Belarus and I moved to the States to actually attend university, and it was around languages and international relations. And I've always looked at things. I was going to be an interpreter originally. To me, it was bridging cultures, languages, or when people couldn't understand each other. It's like how to bridge it. And so I actually look at it now, even to this day, going, I might be translating and interpreting from the same language, two people speaking English in some ways, though they think they are, and then trying to translate for them, what is it that they actually mean so the other person can understand. So my journey kind of started with that. And then from after university graduating, I ended up in human resources. And so overall, actually through I think a temp agency, interestingly enough, like an admin temp agency. And I was like, I guess that was my fate. And so, but I was always interested in people and how people communicate with each other. And what are they trying to convey? And how is it landing for other people? So that's always really made a difference and mattered to me. And so that's the journey of kind of an HR world in hospitality and nonprofits that I worked. And so the most recent final organizational kind of work that I did within the organization was at Esalen Institute as an HR director. And then at some point, it became very clear to me that there's this whole also the coaching world that's really important with the leaders, because there's we spend so much time at work, and it really matters who our leaders are and how they show up. And that's so true. From a leader and the quality of their, again, back to communication, their leadership style, how they lead everybody else's that reports to them, their quality of life really actually also is impacted. So to me, that was a big piece. And it's harder to coach within the organization because I also have effect as an HR director on a lot of people's jobs. So I thought, okay, how do I combine all of the parts of the things I like in HR world? Compliance wouldn't be one of them. Let's put it that way. In California.
I don't blame you.
Exactly. And I would be like, and how do I not do the things I don't want? And so that's how it kind of became this combination of HR consulting that I do with organizations, particularly helping them navigate change and different, kind of whether they're growing, whether they're changing, transforming. My biggest piece with all of that, and the leaders as well within obviously these organizations, is that they have a sense of focus and clarity, but also they're very conscious of the decisions they're making and the impact they're creating. So that's kind of back to that. So through coaching, through consulting on the organizational level, and then facilitation is just actually it's what we do. If there's more than two people in a conversation, you're facilitating whether a small or a big discussion, challenging conflict, whatever that means. That also is a big driver for me in terms of quality of how people communicate and how people kind of learn together, how the teams get cohesive, as opposed to not. And so building those dynamics in a healthy way, it really makes a difference. Yeah. So that's kind of.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love how it all stemmed from you wanting to be an interpreter.
You got it.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
And which is communication, and then and how it just grew from there, because it's not always the lack of English language skills that is the issue.
Not at all, actually. I actually find,
for the most of the time, it's not.
Yeah, as a second language learner, obviously English is my second language. It's actually, I think, those who are learning the language, they pay so much more attention to the language than those of us who are born. I mean, leave me with the Russian, I'll be like, wait, what? How do you, So those are the nuances sometimes that actually really make a difference. And when people pay attention to, like, even coaching a client today who didn't like certain things in their review, and I said, well, you use these words, but they didn't like when those are used against them, and I'm like, these are from you, just don't use their word. It's like withheld was the word, and I'm going, I don't use that in my vocabulary. So it's like, if you use that and then it's kind of used in your review, you're like, I don't like that. I was like, no kidding. Find a different word.
One that isn't as negative, I guess, or could be seen as negative.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, play with the language. And so that's important.
Yeah. And just to sort of continue the interpretation part, when it comes to communication, how we had said that it's not always about the knowledge of English, but when it comes to leaders and anybody who's on the speaking end, I guess, speaking more so on the speaking end, it is eye-opening to them, because it makes them realize that they're not an active listener when they're speaking. They're not paying attention to their audience. It gives them the opportunity to assess themselves in their own communication style, I guess, and realize that as the native speakers, we tend to speak fast. We tend to use a lot of slang, a lot of acronyms that we just assume people know. And as a language learner, whatever language it may be, in the United States, it's English. Yep. I mean, those are very confusing, idioms and things like that. So it's great that you're taking it to that you've taken your that you're coaching leaders, because it really, as you sort of gave reference to it, it starts with the leaders and trickles on down as them being role models for the rest of the organization on how to act, not only how to act, but how to communicate with others, and be have executive presence, and be fully, maybe not even executive presence, just presence and awareness of your audience, and if they're understanding the message that you're trying to get across. And so that's awesome.
Yeah, I think the quality that I wanted to highlight as you were just bringing all of these parts forward is that exactly, like, how is this all landing? And so it does start with, you were talking about mindful, it's like there's deep listening. So when we speak, are we listening? Also, are we able to, when we're done speaking, but also can we read the room? So that whole emotional intelligence piece comes in, that has the components. Because I think sometimes people don't, it's kind of like umbrella. But to me, it's like, it's a good reminder, it's an umbrella of 5 things in emotional intelligence. And it's like, one is empathy. One is actually communication. So skillful communication and kind of social reading. So it's like social languaging piece. One is self-regulation, right? So it's like, can you self-regulate your own emotions and your own kind of possible reactions? And then there's self-awareness that you also spoke about. Are you aware how you're speaking right now? How is this landing right now with the audience? And are you reading that? And the last one is motivation. So all of these parts are part of emotional intelligence, where a lot of times I think it's underestimated. It's kind of like, okay, can you at least socially read the room and speak to the people's, I call it speak to people's listening. So are you speaking into what they're able to understand versus you're just speaking to talk?
Yeah.
Right. And so we can, in terms of communications, we can talk, for a long time about it, because there's definitely a lot of, I can't underline enough, and as working with some of the organizations right now, like literally this morning, all of the challenges, literally all of them, 95%, they come from not clear communication and lack of certain communication skills. And so literally I had 2 leaders today at separate coaching talking about how it's hard for them with their boss that I talked to yesterday. And all of a sudden the light bulbs go on and it's like, oh, you guys are frustrating with this, but he's trying. And so they're just doing this all the time. Oh, right. Wow. And so I love that work when it's like actually several leaders I get to work with, because it is like a puzzle. It's like a matrix, like whatever, movies we've seen. It's like literally, today, I was just so excited. They're talking, like one of them was talking and one talked in the morning before. And all of a sudden, I just like have this puzzle, like totally put into, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. I actually know where the thing stems from. But then it requires their desire to change, their ability and desire to learn, and then otherwise and then their self-awareness. And those don't come like overnight. It's a very practiced skill, but muscle. The self-awareness piece is like, it has to come from reflecting and pausing and wanting to actually learn. Because it's like, what am I doing that I can do differently? Or what am I doing that's working well? That's another piece with Skip. We have, that's another topic this week with my clients. It's such a high negativity bias. We humans and our beautiful brains are just latch on to the one negative thing, but there's like, it goes really deep. And so that negativity bias, like I can't underline enough, is remember to celebrate the wins. Find every day or every week of what is it that you've done, small or large, doesn't matter, but you pause, you acknowledge, you celebrate. Particularly as a leader, you probably do it really well for your team. I also need you to do it for yourself, because otherwise it's very easy for high achievers specifically, and then it comes perfectionism comes on top of it, and on is they care for others, but then they're really critical of themselves. And so
I think that's more common than not.
Absolutely. And so that's the part where we can work with our brain and wiring to go, what are the things that worked well that I did, or that I contributed to, or that I just helped somebody? And so that softens that hard edge of like that one thing that you did, or your boss said that you did, that you just go in circles about.
That's cool. So it's sort of like a self-weekly report.
I definitely would. That was my one of the recommendations to their boss. I said, in your check-ins and your meetings, I need you to actually start with the question, like, what is it that went well this week? So it just stops this whole like constructive or not constructive, but it's feedback that is perceived that's always negative, but it's important. So I said, it's kind of like opening a window to speak to whatever is happening well, and then you can speak to things that might need improvement. So that's just, a little trick per se.
A few of the last organizations I've been a part of always started off like staff meetings, like with kudos, or where who has kudos to give for somebody else, or that question, what were your successes this week? Did anybody have any successes this week that they want to mention? a lot of times it takes a little bit of like
it definitely does. And it's easier for people, I mean, you know, as you work, you know, with kind of talent, is that it's easier for people to do it for others.
Yes.
They have no problem generally. I mean, if it's a culture of like just supportive and healthy culture, then they're just like, yeah, that person did this and that person did that. And I always go, that's great. I really also need people to pay attention as well to themselves, because we go very externally, and the internal talk stays critical and negative. And so that's the self-reflection piece as well.
Yeah, that's very, as you had said, it's very hard to retrain your brain and way of thinking about yourself to do that. So it does take time.
Absolutely.
But with all types of relationships, and communication is a type of relationship, it's a communication relationship. It's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight, like you said. So
no, patience and practice. It's all good.
Patience. The 2 P's. Patience, and perseverance. PPP.
There you go. The 3 P's. That's all good. Yeah.
Yes.
It's easy to remember for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So, in your you came from Belarus, and you've experienced different cultural biases and stuff. So what role does cultural sensitivity play in transformational practices, and how can leaders cultivate this within their teams?
So cultural sensitivity overall, and particularly in transformational practices, because if you're transforming, that means there's change. With change comes differences are going to always come to the surface a lot more acutely. And also with change comes a lot of discomfort and internal challenges for people. Because as much as we say like change is inevitable, the only constant in this world is that is always change. We as humans generally are very uncomfortable with change.
We're very resistant.
So for me, the cultural piece of it is actually before you're consciously transforming the organization, there's still change happening. Is actually become aware of cultural, even composition of your team, for example, right? Or your organization, because it really also makes a difference when it's actually global. So what I also notice, and I work majority in the United States, but I have friends in global organizations, like how different they think, because it's cultures, it's physically other countries and cultures. No matter how everybody looks. In the United States, it comes very more to the race conversation, for example, or gender. It becomes a little tighter in some places. However, the whole point is back to that mindfulness and awareness, is that, are you aware of your makeup? So for me, if I'm very explicit and blunt, I come from Belarus, so it's a different country. But I look the way I look. I am white, Caucasian, and I come across, people probably can't pick up that I'm from a different country. In the first 10 minutes they talk to me. So does that mean something in this world, in this country? Yes. Is there certain privileges or the way I can navigate this world and certain places? Yes. If I'm not aware of that or don't recognize it, then I am not aware, and I just kind of move like, oh, this is how everybody moves. That's not true. So it's also the whether it's the cultural trainings, or like all the biases, the different biases we have, trainings. And as much as sometimes people are like, not another training, but if you come to any training with an open mind, just to learn something new for yourself, I can guarantee you will walk away with something new that you didn't recognize. And as a leader, what I always try to remind various leaders I work with from very various backgrounds is, you got to remember what your lenses are. And if you're not aware of them and the backgrounds you come from, and then as a leader, you have power. And you hold power, And with that power comes responsibility. Yep. So you got to represent different voices and different people and different, just variations of what people's needs are. In order to do that well and mindfully, you got to understand what their needs are. And I can guarantee you as well that people from different cultures have different needs.
Yeah, they do.
Because they come from very different backgrounds. And so to me, what can be done is your question is like, be curious, have a learning culture. So continue learning and kind of like and also I think with all of these different trainings and particularly in the space of DI, a lot of people just sometimes are like, I can't ever get it right, that kind of like thing. And I go, just do your best.
Yeah.
If we're all
practice makes better.
Place, exactly. So it's like, it doesn't make perfect. Exactly. It makes better. So do your best every time you can. And keep learning, because when you learn, you will change some things. And as you change some things might work, some things might not. But unless you start doing that and continue working through being curious and continue working on your own awareness of what's the place you're coming from, what's your background, how do you navigate this world, and being open to hearing how other people navigate this world or how the world kind of responds or reacts to them, then you have a more inclusive dynamic versus, well, this is kind of how it is. And so, so that's kind of what I look at those people. And then structured communication, it's like you looking into how to include as many people. And so my point is always like, talk to them. That's literally like, you're never going to know the story.
Ask questions.
Your story in your head. Ask questions. Have feedback sessions. But again, like, as recently I've been working with the organization, people are like, we want feedback, but we don't want critical stuff. And we are very resistant. And I go, what do you think? I was like, you guys, this is a little difficult here. You know what I mean? So
we don't want to hear the good stuff.
But you don't want it this way. It's like, so I'm all about delivering it in a healthy way, back to the impact and how it lands with people. But unless you talk, and unless, again, you come with curiosity and openness, saying, I want to understand, and go do some basic trainings. So then people don't have to chew it up for you to over and over. And you come, it's a vulnerable space.
It is.
It's absolutely. It comes with that effort. But back to emotional intelligence. These are all of the things that are connected, is that, yes, you got to be self-aware. That's a vulnerable space. You got to be self-reflective. You got to be able to listen to people. Remember, when you're listening, it's deeply listening to understand, not to respond. A lot of times we're listening and we have our response already. We're just waiting for them to finish so we can say our piece. That's not listening. That's definitely not listening. Right? So if that's the intention, you won't get far. And everybody most likely is going to walk away frustrated. So figure out your intention for whatever conversation about cultural diversity and approach that you want. Because if you want transformational change and you want it successful, then you want everybody together moving in the same direction. To get everybody together moving in the same direction, there's got to be a vision that everybody's behind. But you also got to get people to understand what's in it for them. Why does it matter? And that way you got to understand the nuances of whether the cultures you serve within your organization, they're just like, as a leader, these are just as your clients, as the external world. These are, yes, you work with all of them, but look at that as, how can you serve your people? So it's more of in service of others.
I love that. That was a very beautiful and thorough answer. I love that. And I agree with everything you said, actually. But I was going to but you had mentioned, I was going to add in something, but you extended your answer and mentioned it about the communication and talking. Part of the trainings that can happen are those facilitated vulnerable conversations, intergroup dialogues, where people know that it's a safe space. What happens in that room stays in that room. There's no judgment, no backlash, and it's listening to people, their experiences, their stories, and hopefully diminishing those stereotypes and biases that everybody has biases, but it helps to make us aware that, oh, their experiences, they don't experience the world the same way I do. And it's like, oh, well, that never happens to me. And it realizes that we all have, no matter who we are, what color we are, how old we are, where we come from, we all have things that work for us and work against us, because we're complex creatures. We have intersectional identities, and so it's just realizing that, as you had said, self-assessing yourself, and which is uncomfortable. Especially you're like, well, I'm not biased, I don't have any prejudice, but we all do.
Oh my God, that was that I've actually had that in one organization when I still was in organization, when it was like we brought up the bias training, right, the unconscious bias, and it was literally predominantly, like, and literally a person who would be the most general public kind of literally was like, we don't have any biases, like it's totally. And I literally looked at it, was like, do I bring a mirror? Like, what do I do right now in this situation? It's like, oh my God. But to me, it was concerning because I was a top leader and they were very strong in their opinion. But that means like, I really got to push this rock up the mountain right now, because there's really like no opening, and back to the awareness. And so that's the part. And I think one thing I wanted to add as you were speaking, it reminded me, a client of mine shared today. She also does leadership work. And she said, you mentioned psychological safety and safe space. Yes. And so she said she was delivering somewhere also leadership work. And there's a study, like from humorous, I think, that shows that it is the leader. Literally 70% of people feel psychological safety, the safe space, and the sense of belonging. It's like 70% is dependent on the leader creating that, literally. That's it. So leaders, if you have any humans that report to you, that is a responsibility. It's not an easy task, but if you have people or you have feedback that people don't feel safe, that they don't feel a sense of belonging, please self-reflect what you can do, because at the end of the day, it's the direct leader who can make it or break it. And it's kind of like back to that statement of people don't leave the organizations, they leave the leaders that they work for. And so but it also goes in a very healthy, super high percentage way of saying, you as a leader actually have this much influence on people's sense of belonging, safety, safety. And that sense of belonging is being driving this generations, I think, kind of like that's coming into the workforce, and overall, like lately, that's the biggest driver for people at work, is the sense of belonging. People are like, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, it means different things for different people.
It's true.
So that's back to the cultural diversity, is like, go find out. Because of what it means to you is different. What it means to me is going to be different to something, but find a common ground. Don't raise your hands to be like, well, I can't please everybody. That's true. So it's back to doing your best with what you have at the moment, and then keep learning and keep changing based on that, from a very conscious space, like you are with awareness of why you're making this change and what maybe down the road that might create, not from a reactive space.
I love that. And you sort of mentioned it again right now, like the why. And it's when when people know the why of an organization, the impact of their work and the impact their contributions make, and they also have a sense of psychological safety and belonging in the workplace, the chances of them staying with that organization longer increase, because employees are the best review of it, or the worst review of an organization. And the ones that have a bad experience are going to be very vocal about it. Could be very vocal about it. I wouldn't say will be, but could be very vocal about it. And in today's day and age, with technology and the internet and all, it can spread like wildfire, because especially on LinkedIn, because all those connections, like you're like three connections away of knowing everybody in the world. So it
feels like it
has
sometimes.
a big impact.
Yeah. No, and what you bring up is the part, it's like the why is, it's not just that it's a retention piece. It's actually, it's a huge, just like it's achieving, it's the goals, it's motivation, all of those pieces. Actually, it's the happiness factor, it's the well-being, it's the belonging, all of those parts. And actually, we talk about resources, like Simon Sinek talks a lot about it in his work. Yeah, exactly. And his work of, the whole why piece is actually, I love his work, because that's literally like his circles of the thing is, what's the why? And it goes just even beyond to be like a bottom line of like, okay, let's retain. It's going to ripple into so much more. And at every change, as we talk about, transformational or like anything, is, as a leader, always think how do you connect your people's why to what you need, where you need the organization to go. So whether it's your vision, whether it's the goals, whether you have a nonprofit that has a mission, how is every person in your organization, from those who are cleaning the bathrooms to those who are, doing the sales, the marketing, just all over, everybody, nobody's excluded, but everybody has their why. And how is their why connected to the why of the organization and the mission? If it's a nonprofit, then you can row together in the same direction, and everybody's going to have a meaningful, it's the connection, it's the meaning. So they have the sense of meaning of their work is meaningful, and that's all we're striving for. Is that, as you asked me at the beginning, you're like, how did you kind of became like, how you're doing what you're doing, is I come to this point and I find my work very meaningful. And so it makes a huge difference to me every day. And so I definitely, I'll palpably know the difference between how is my work connecting to whatever we're doing versus what I do now. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference when you know the contributions that you make and how they affect everything. And I love that you brought up from the custodian on up, and even to like vendors, external vendor partners and stuff. It's everybody has their contributions, and if one of them is misaligned in any way, it's going to have a domino effect. Like an employee doesn't like to go into a filthy restroom. And it could impact their day negatively. Or like their trash, is not taken out. I mean, it has a domino effect.
It definitely ripples, and it doesn't take much. So it's like creating the positive piece. It's like, it takes kind of like where your tide raises all boats in a way, they kind of rise together. But actually, like when it says like not even bad apple, but like if there's a toxic employee you have, right? One is enough. Exactly. And you go, wait a minute, what just happened? But it's like, so it's like, pay attention and what's flaring that up and what's important.
Who thrives in chaos.
Yeah, exactly. But also don't be afraid to have difficult conversations. Don't be afraid to have like, this is okay behavior, this is not okay behavior. Because remember, we're all humans in adult looking bodies, but it's all children.
Yeah, I think the same
we
way.
all behave. We go to like, it's interesting to see people in like challenging situation, right? Or in crisis mode.
Yep.
It's because we all default to whatever the emotional growth stop,
Yep.
behavior. For some, it's like middle school. For some, it's high school. For some, it's a little older. But all of a sudden, like it's funny. It's like, I was doing a group coaching course around confidence. I call it Confidence Catalyst for leaders. And one of the people brought up, they're like, oh my God, I was in the board meeting and one of the board members like totally threw up a tantrum. And I go, well, did it look like a middle school or high school? And they're like, literally their eyes lit up. They're like,
no, he was on the floor.
Yeah, it was like 8th grade. And I go, good. So now you know that this member, when things get tough, is going to be around that behavior. So for me, it's always kind of like, to me, I'm kind of like, you can't shift him right now. I mean, if he's working with a coach, or like if you are, if he's listening to you as his confidant or he trusts you, sure, you could give some feedback and back to awareness if he's able to self-reflect and do things. But when you see people behaving a certain way, notice it's like, okay, this is where you are when things get, chaotic or tough. And so when this happens again, don't use surprise. That's when I go like, didn't this happen before? They're like, yeah, but aren't they like in their 40s or 50s or 60s? I go, yeah, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, we're big kids.
Exactly. And so it's just, it's remembering that, because I think we get, for those of us also who are parents, it's like, I have a teen. And sometimes it's like the age of teenagers, it's like, it's the glimpse, they're like, we're adults. And then they literally default like the next second to like a 12-year-old or like something. And you go, what just happened? Like, I had no warning whatsoever. And so I go, at least he taught me, it's like, it's uncomfortable to be them, to go through this kind of growth stuff. But we do give them the benefit of a doubt. But yes, when we get to a certain age and and skills and level in the organization, that's my thing with leaders, is like, if you're a leader, you have a lot of responsibility and accountability. And yes, it can be lonely at the top. Absolutely. Then find your network, find the people you can trust, that you could, work with and vent to. That's all super important. But yes, you hold a lot of that, because you also hold power, and you hold, so that with that comes responsibility. So back to emotional intelligence, learn how to self-regulate, human beings. It's really important.
Yes. And to have empathy for
absolutely.
others. Don't assume, like, if somebody's having a bad day and acting out on it, don't assume the worst. I mean, you don't know what happened to them before they walked in that room.
No, absolutely. So it's like, how can you be in the shoes of the other person? You know what I mean? That's empathy. And then the compassion piece, it's more like, how can you help them act on something? So how can you be an active participant in shifting that space and environment? So that's the parts. Yeah, that's the parts that are important.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. So let's go to our next question.
Sure.
So how can organizations ensure that change management processes do not disproportionately impact marginalized employees?
The part about it, I think we talked a little bit about it, is that as you embark on change, and you have if you do have your change management processes, if not, you're creating them, is think of all of your stakeholders, all of your employees, and then actually you mentioned like vendors and all of the different ways, like how is it going to impact everybody? And then within the employee group, it's back to, it's whether doing, for example, focus, how can you get input from various voices? So whether you have, if you already have employee resource groups, right? So you can tap into that. If not, like, you have focus groups that you create around maybe the topic, or that's a focus group around the change or a certain part of the change. That way you also get the buy-in and the engagement of different levels of the organization. So that's also important, I think, to me, is, and I've seen it in my own experience, like, become director and above, and think that you know how it's going to directly impact the line staff, like the very entry level, and you have like supervisors and coordinators and managers and everybody else in between you, is a total denial of reality to me, because you are not you're not at that level, because anywhere you walk in as a director. People treat you as such
differently.
You walk in with the power dynamic. You walk with a different experience. So getting people from various levels of the organization is super important. And then having people representing, whether as a voice, whether they're visually represent, or in some ways, like they don't have to reflect visually per se the group, but if they understand and can express the voice of a certain group and dynamics, is having more of that. So on the front, I think for the change, to me, it's like some things might take longer. And I think that's where leaders get impatient. It's like, okay, some change it has to be urgent, but not all of this. Not all of it has to be urgent all the time.
Yeah.
So if you could think it through, and if you could be mindful through your process and very kind of deliberate in your part of the input, that to me is the biggest piece. So it's feedback sessions. It's even like group kind of, depending on how big your organization is, you might have listening circles. But for every single thing you start, whether it's listening circle, whether it's focus group, whether it's feedback survey, think of your intention. Why are you doing it? And what do you want to get from it? And communicate that. Because the worst you could do is gather people or gather their feedback or gather their survey and then do nothing with
Exactly.
That
is the worst.
Exactly. Then now you completely, it's not just like you didn't do anything. You actually eroded trust and morale. And now you're going to have to walk up the hill from this, which you don't have to unless you create circumstances like this. So to me, it's whatever format that you see that fits the company and the timing, and kind of like, maybe you're having several of them at the same time, and you have, some people lead them and then gather the information. But be very clear why you're doing it, what's the outcome that you want, and what are you going to do with that information. And those are the parts that then people know what they're contributing to, which means where their voice matters. It doesn't have to be, you can also be very clear. Yes, we'll hear all the different input and opinions. That doesn't mean we'll take them all and implement them all. But please be mindful to kind of take some into consideration and then report back. That's what doesn't happen very often, is that that communication loop gets broken. It's like you start because everybody's motivated and things are going to change and that needs to get done. And then just things kind of like happen and nothing gets communicated of what's taken place and how that feedback got taken into consideration. But if you close that loop, it will go a long way, because people, trust me, people will feel heard.
Yep.
If you ask them, you took their information and then you did something with it. And then you told them what you did with it. Or pieces. That's it.
I love that. And it's also, or gaining the trust of your teams, your employees, your staff in the organization. It's like, and if they see that their input is being considered, and that those occasional reports are being given back to them about decision processes and stuff, they're going to be more apt to participate in future focus groups, in future surveys, and be even more honest.
Exactly.
And it's like it, as you said, it all stems down from the leadership, and it's I wish more organizations actually gave that constant, I wouldn't say constant, but somewhat regular feedback on it. Yep. They usually just do the surveys or the groups and then nothing. And then they, here's our policy, our new, strategic plan or whatever. And you're like, well, where'd this come from? Because there was no, feedback given to the employees. So
there's no follow-up. That's the
follow-up. There we go.
No follow-up. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it will go, just like what you said at the beginning, it will go such a long way for your employee engagement in the future. So don't be nearsighted. Like, think, you might not think about it right now and you're in a hurry and you just want this change, but with it comes all kinds of impact. And you can create great impact, just like exactly what you're saying. Yes, you could go through very difficult change. You could be having very difficult conversations and people could be really vocal. And it's really hard to hold that space as a leader with people's, all of the energy and emotions. And that's a part of your job. That's generally actually what I tell my clients. It's like, that's a tough thing. Therefore, you need to be resourced. You need to take care of yourself. You need to do a whole bunch of figuring out what that means to you, so then you can show up and hold that space. And then after, exactly, you said, follow up and give, and say, like, this is what we're deciding. We heard all of these points, or some of them mentioning them, right? We took
these were tabled for later.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
This were tabled, this with this. And then it's like, this is what we're doing. And you just keep repeating that. And then people learn to trust that even if I'm upset, I will, I can actually express it, and then there might be some changes, might not be, but then I will hear what happens after those sessions. So
So this whole process, as you were explaining everything, it reminded me of, because I used to be a teacher as well, and basically it's very similar to a classroom structure when the teacher is developing the classroom rules and consequences, when the teacher involves the students in the process, instead of just saying, these are the rules, this is what the consequences are, blah, blah, blah. If the teacher develops them and tells them this is how it's going to be, it's my way or the highway, there's the chances of there being more resistance in the classroom from students, and behavior issues increases. Whereas if they feel the students feel part of the conversation, they tend to actually be even more hard on themselves. And
that's actually, you're telling me, like, and I now remember my son explaining something like, exactly, when they're given a chance, an option to be like, okay, how do you want everybody to show up? You're correct. They would be like, well, we don't want anybody chewing gum. We don't want anybody disrespectful. We don't want anybody talking over somebody else. And the list can go on and on. And the teacher would have said like 3 things that are the most major. But that's exactly what you're saying. And into your question is that involve diverse voices in decision making. Don't be afraid to do that, but also challenge yourself to find those diverse voices, because a lot of times they think differently than you do. And so therefore they'll speak differently, and it would be uncomfortable in some situations, but you won't have a bigger picture as a leader unless you have diverse voices.
Exactly.
Just like of just even your options and the choices and the possibilities. Because if we all, which we tend to do, if we all surround ourselves with like-minded people, which is super cool and comfortable because everybody is agreeing, we're all on the same page. Yeah, but that's not, we don't grow that
that's
way,
not life,
first of all. And we don't find, that's not how innovation works, by the way, like at all.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right.
You need those different perspectives and experiences.
Completely. And generally the different perspectives come from people that are very different, or they think differently. And that's back to even your main topic, like the neurodivergent, you know what I mean? It's like, they'll say something and the way they say it, people are like, I don't like how it sounds. Well, it's a different perspective. So let's work with how it sounds, how it lands, if at all possible, but also working with everybody to be like, okay, well, how can I work? We all tend to now have a lot more kind of softer thing about, oh, these are the IT people, or these are the engineers, and they have, sometimes we kind of label people into a group of how, whatever, social skills, or how they deliver
they're
the
introverts or something like that.
Yeah, or something like that. But it's like, but they hold so much knowledge that the other boxes, if you're going to put things in boxes, don't. And so if you don't have diversity, you just have very homogenized, actually, way of thinking and ideas. You're just going to get really boring as a company.
Yeah. And your bottom line's going to suffer.
And that's exactly, I was like, that's not how competition works. So if you want innovation, you have to have very different voices. But you also
customers are all over the world.
Exactly. But you also got to know how to work with them. And that's not by putting everybody to sound and behave and do things the way you do it. So yeah.
Cool. So we talked a little bit about empowering diverse voices, but how do we measure DEI impact? So how can organizations measure the impact of their DEI efforts on workplace culture during times of transformation?
I mean, we talked a little bit about it.
A little bit,
but it's coming back to the, surveys in a way and feedback mechanisms. So it could be different. It could be different for each organization, depending how big or small you are. But again, it's actually back to, when you do things like that, what's the intention? What do you want to know? Right? And then what are you going to do with information that you receive? So that's a big one. The focus groups, it's back to that, or like, soliciting, kind of having people from different, whether departments or levels, is kind of like, okay, now we've done this. How is it working? But that's very like, it's a smaller percentage of people. And then also like measuring success, maybe kind of like what are the customers saying, if that's, affecting them, depending what were your initiatives, right? In terms of the DI initiatives, or what's the product, or like, how are you delivering? Is it delivering to different, stakeholders now, a different customer base, and you could measure it that. But also like, I come from hospitality and, nonprofit, but it was also a retreat center. You can also measure it by observing people's behaviors, to be quite honest. So before the DI practices, even before, when I was an HR director, it's like a lot of times people start doing some training, because something challenging happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a reaction.
It's a reaction, or it's a Band-Aid, or it's like, oh my God, we are so like, don't know how to, have a conversation or deal with certain things. And noticing really big, whatever, or not big, but holes in certain things. And it's actually, you could see it. You could see by who is coming to the workshops, and how are people interacting, and what are people giving feedback that's unsolicited, actually, and not poignant, but customers from their experience, right?
Yeah.
And if it's certain groups of customers, then you can target that in terms of, but it is coming back to conversations, whether you do them digitally. So it's back to communication, whether you do digitally, whether you do it in person, whether you get groups, whether you do survey, or all of the above. Always make sure you communicate why you're doing this, what you're doing this for, what are you going to do with information provided, and do the follow-up with everybody once you've got the information. And so then people for themselves, they could see, they might agree or disagree. That's another thing. You're not getting everybody to agree with you. But as an organization and leadership team or something, if you're deciding to take on an initiative, or this is important, how do you measure it? Well, you have to metrics it somehow. You know what I mean? So I think those are the couple of things, like I wrote down, like, you could also do like, different diversity metrics. It depends on the size of the organization. Again, what are you measuring and why? It's back to why, as opposed to, I think we're supposed to do this, so let's do this. Great. Now what? So think through creating more good than actually inadvertently creating more harm.
As you were talking, it took me back to a survey when I was a director of a workforce development program, and it was part of a company that has has multiple locations across the United States, and the company I worked for was a daughter company of a larger organization from another country, and that had a lot of work, bought up a lot of workforce development companies around the world. And the company I went in, or the position I went into this position and had to fix a lot of toxicity, do a lot of repairs, customer relations, partner relations, internal and external, and improve the staff turnover rate. And because of the toxic environments. And I was the fourth director in 3 years. And so
wow.
And just to give you an idea. And so, I did a lot of work, and there was a survey that came out maybe like my first month that went out to all the organizations. And then maybe about 7 months in, another survey went out to all, a similar survey went out to all organizations. And the 7-month one of the questions was, do you feel anything will happen with the information provided in this survey, from this survey? And I had like
majority.
Over 90%. Yeah. And I was like the second one from all and it's like, that said, I mean, for them to even put that question on the survey says a lot, but for somebody who's only 7 months in, to be number 2 across all the organizations, even higher than the mother company, said a lot. And so about
so wait, did they answer yes or no?
I'm sorry, 90% positive. Yes.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Cool.
Sorry.
Because I was like,
sorry about that. I assumed, and you should never assume.
I was like, which direction did it go?
Yeah, positive to a yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Because I was present, and I was, I had that, and not that you have to have an open door policy, but I had an open door policy. But
you were very engaging too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it just, when you were talking, it just brought me back to that. And it's like, wow. So it makes me wonder how many, you have your work cut out for you, because I'm sure there's a lot of organizations, which is why you started your work.
I'll tell you, I did a quality, like it was a culture, or it was more of like employee survey in an organization. Is one of the first project. It was last year. And it was like 1,200 people, and they just wanted my help to digest the results and then help the director and management team to like do some action steps and stuff. And I did that with them, and it was a great, beautiful process, and everybody was super engaged, especially management level. And then the top level did nothing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I mean, the top 2 people. So the directors were trying, and the managers were going. And so when I met with one of the directors, who originally was HR, who originally hired me, and I was like, how's it going? She was like, not.
No.
And it was so deflating. Like I watched her just like completely deflate, like from this process, right? And again, the part about my work is that not get attached, honestly, to like, and there's whatever consultants have rep of like, oh, they come in and they don't have to do the work. I actually do the work with the people. That's awesome. For sure. Because it's like, that's the most important thing. So they're supporting to the work, but I'm not there, for the year for them to be implementing it. And
then you assess and everything.
And if the top leader is like not driving it, the managers, everybody just gets to like, well, why are we doing this? You know what I mean? And so I was like, well, that's a bummer.
Yeah. And even like showing up to ERGs every now and then, and different focus groups is so important as a leader, because it shows your teams, your employees, that this matters to you. And it's more than just a checkbox.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the most important thing. You really gotta be present and show and model. It's modeling. Modeling is what's important. It models that it matters. And so keep doing it. Yeah.
Yep. So we actually skipped the first question. I apologize. So,
Okay.
how can leaders ensure that their approach to navigating change is inclusive of all team members, especially from the underrepresented groups like neurodiverse employees?
How can they approach that is inclusive? It's back to communication. So we started with this, actually. We started with active or deep listening. Yes. And that's the part, is the listening piece, and navigating it that way. So it's intentional communication. So you're intentionally communicating to whether it's certain groups or certain way, and finding out how to best to communicate with neurodiverse. Like if we're talking about topic of neurodiversity, is that, not everybody, let's say, is a visual, like when we want to see the picture. Some people need to see it in writing. Some people need to hear it. Some people need to see a visual, like a video thing. Some people just need a picture. Yeah. Learn how your people tend to understand and absorb the information better. And that happens by talking to them. You won't know unless you ask. It's exactly that piece. And then, the other piece would be, it's kind of like what we started with. It's like that bias training and awareness is find a ways, at least in a generic sense, to even understand what that might mean. And in a more specific way, if you have a certain group that's, represented in certain ways, is learn from them, go and learn from them. And so that's the part that I think is really important. And so, yeah, it's back to whether it's focus groups, it's back to inviting people from that group into decision-making process or into discussion process. But I think the other piece is back to stay curious. You know what I mean? Stay curious, stay engaged, be open-minded. Those are the parts that are really important.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know we're a little over time, so let's go into some key takeaways. So some of the key takeaways we got out of today's conversation, listeners, are mindful leadership. We talked about how leaders can use mindfulness to guide their teams through change effectively and with empathy. We talked about transformational practices and gained some insights into transformational practices that drive positive change and unlock human potential in the workplace. We talked about DEI integrations and some strategies for integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into change management processes to create a more inclusive and supportive work environment. And we talked about building resilient teams and talked about some techniques for fostering resilience and adaptability within teams to navigate changes smoothly. And we talked about sustainable success, about how to achieve lasting success by embedding mindful and transformational practices into the organization's culture. Are there any other key takeaways that you have for our listeners today?
I think it's developing your emotional intelligence from various aspects that I spoke about, 5 parts of it. But it's also just a part of, like, at every given moment, just check with yourself. Are you doing your best with any given situation and any given information? And then are you able to learn whatever you might be open to learning? And I think just to stay curious. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Those are all great takeaways. Thank you. Yeah. So let's talk about some possible next steps for our listeners.
Sure.
So listeners, implement mindful practices. Start incorporating mindfulness techniques into daily routines to better manage stress and enhance your focus. Engage in DEI training. Participate in DEI training programs to improve understanding and implementation to inclusive practices. Promote open communication. Encourage open and honest communication within teams, honest and respectful, I should say, communication within teams to ensure everyone's voice is heard during change initiatives. Evaluate change management strategies. Regularly review and assess the effectiveness of change management strategies to identify areas for improvement. And join professional networks. Connect with professionals and organizations dedicated to DEI and mindful leadership to stay updated on best practices and new insights. Tatyana, do you have any other next steps for listeners? Suggestions?
I think another thing is you were saying, like, the join professional networks, but it's also find mentorship. It's actually support is super, super important. And mentorship is important. Coaching is great. Not every organization, every person can pay for coaching, but it's whatever support you can find. So you are not alone in the world, in the job, and whatever you're going through. Trust me, you're not alone. However, it can feel like that sometimes. So find mentor, find support. Sometimes a lot of organizations, pay for coaching if you ask, but it is your person. That's your cheerleader. It's asking for that help and support, and that could go a long way as well. Exactly.
I agree. And I am such a strong proponent for mentorship because and it's a support. It's a two-way street for support. You sort of support each other.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful. So Tatyana, if any of our listeners want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
The best way to reach me would be actually on LinkedIn. And you can just actually look at my name, or I'll also put a link, you'll have a link and I'll add. And I also want listeners to know I do a monthly newsletter, and I'll set a link with Andrea, and there's one on LinkedIn as well. And I call it, How is it working for you? And so that's all around literally leadership. And I always do this topic, like last month was resilience, actually.
Oh, nice.
And so the employee value is this month. And so I get a topic all around employees and leadership. And then in the newsletter, I just discuss 3 practices for the leader and 3 practices for the team. So I'm a very practical person.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah. And so those are the ways you could stay connected. You could look at things. And then at the end, I don't know if now or later, but I have a quote that I want to share.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think to me, one of the best quotes. So that's by Victor Frankel. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. So remember, whatever comes your way, you have the power to pause. And in that pause, you get to choose how you want to respond. That is your self-awareness practice, at least one of them. And it's definitely a practice. So don't beat yourself up when you react. But as we said, with the 3 PPPs, we had patience, practice, and perseverance. And all of those things will go a long way. Thank you.
Nice. I love that quote. And I will put that quote on your slide with all your information.
No worries. I'll find
a nice image of it. You're welcome. So just to reiterate, so LinkedIn, your monthly newsletter, how's it working for you, and your LinkedIn newsletter?
Yes, that sounds
awesome.
great.
Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's my name. It's the oldest, it's the oldest media. So it's TatyanaSanikovich.com. But it's actually, it's definitely there and it's available, but it's one of the first things that I created when I went on my own. So I just the most updated stuff is on LinkedIn, which either way works. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So listeners, I will have Tatyana's, you're welcome. I will have Tatyana's contact information on one of the last slides today, as well as some suggested resources for you. So with that, listeners, thank you so much for listening today. Remember, all of our episodes drop on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So with that, I will let you go. Tatyana, thank you so much for being our guest today. It was a joy having you.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you. Listeners, stay Diversifused. I will talk with you later. Bye.
Bye.
Want to be a guest speaker on the Get Diversifused podcast? I'm on the lookout for guests, so if you're passionate about DEI and would like to share your unique insights, experiences, or success stories, I want to hear from you. If you're a fellow podcaster who's passionate about DEI, let's swap the mic and amplify each other's voices. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out to me at Andrea@Diversifuse.com and I'll send you the link to our best interest form. Hope to hear from you soon. Remember, stay Diversifused. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at Diversifuse.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts,